Welcome to Healthcare du Jour, where we dish up and digest the latest in healthcare. For the next 30 minutes, sit back as we bring you insight, commentary, and discussion on trending topics to the table, all expertly served up by our host and his guests. Healthcare du Jour is brought to you by Carium, the telehealth platform enabling healthcare's digital transformation, helping you care for people within the fabric of their daily lives. Now here's your host, Matt Fisher.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining as we dive into the hottest topics in healthcare. I'm your host, Matt Fisher. On the menu today is Jean-Claude Saghbini, Chief Technology Officer at Wolters Kluwer Health. Welcome, Jean-Claude.
Well, thank you very much, Matt.
So, Jean-Claude, it's great to have you here. And what I always like to do before getting into the main part of the conversation is to let my guests provide a little bit more of an introduction in terms of who they are and what they do. So the floor is yours.
Sure. First of all, it's great to be part of this podcast. Give you some background. So as you said, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Wolters Kluwer Health. Some background on Wolters Kluwer. We're probably more known for the solutions themselves that we have versus the company. We have solutions that help about more than 6 million clinicians, nurses, researchers, doctors, pharmacists, etc. in north of 190 countries. And what they do is they use our solutions effectively on a daily basis, products like UpToDate for clinical decision support. We have Lippincott for nursing and education. We have our ME patient engagement solutions. As another example, we have Ovid, which is a research platform. And we also have a set of clinical surveillance solutions that ingest EHR data and provide alerts to clinicians in workflow. So that's a bit of the background on what we do. I run technology there. I'm also in charge of our advanced technology, artificial intelligence, and I think it's one of the topics we're going to talk about today. And again, happy to be here.
So have you always been kind of connected to the healthcare industry, or was that a kind of a mid-career transition for you?
Yeah, it feels like forever, but it has not been forever. So my background is engineering. I've always been in technology. Around 2005, I decided to get into a vertical, and I wanted to get into something I'm passionate about, and that's how I got into healthcare. I did that through a startup that we started in 2005. I built the technology there. We were doing RFID to track medical devices all the way to implant into patients. So we grew that from 2005. We had a successful exit in 2013. And then, I've stayed in healthcare since then.
So kind of given that background, what are some of your primary focuses, as we're starting to transition into a new year and have been able to see a lot of growth in technology-based solutions as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, the biggest thing we're looking at now is both shaping as well as figure out how to integrate in this new evolving healthcare ecosystem. So this past year has had a tremendous impact. It's sort of a sad situation what happened this past year. As a result of that, and sort of big thanks to the entire healthcare ecosystem, lots of transformation has happened. Big moves to virtual. Virtual is not new; it has always existed, but this has been a crazy acceleration into virtual. And what we're doing is figuring out what are those new workflows and what are the needs of our customers, what are the needs of frontline clinicians, and how do we support them?
Yeah, and thinking about those needs, kind of what are the needs that have kind of risen to the top, and what are some of the solutions that are able to meet and satisfy what's needed to drive the ability to deliver patient care? Yeah,
so I mentioned virtual care. I'll take a sort of step back on that and define what's underneath it, and we can sort of dive into it as we go along. So the one thing I want to do is point out the definition of it. Sometimes it's referred to as telehealth, or people think of virtual care as being telehealth and video consult, etc. But virtual care extends way beyond that and actually has been around for a long time. Part of it is, this video consult aspect. Part of it is providing digital patient education, doing triages, doing self-serve question answering for patients, using technology to do proactive nudges, using technology to engage patients post-discharge, as well as patients who have chronic conditions, so that technology can guide them towards the path of recovery or away from hospital admissions, etc. So I look at that whole thing as the umbrella of virtual care. And what we're doing in that space is focusing both on the new workflows that are happening, such as, again, teleconsult, et cetera, and how do we create seamless experiences between patients and clinicians, but also focusing on patients who, more than ever, because they don't have the ability all the time to get into a clinic or visit a doctor, et cetera, how do we use digital technology to engage them along their care journeys, and this is smack in the middle of where our focus is now.
Yeah, and kind of you're defining of virtual care is definitely helpful because as you said, it covers so many different means of interaction that it also seems to be expanding kind of the scope of how healthcare is perceived. It's I think as you're describing, it's kind of being able to get a view into an individual's complete life as opposed to just relying upon the few minutes out of the year, when they're actually inside the walls of a healthcare facility.
Exactly. It's and it's all about it's both getting a view of what's going on with the patient, but also it's activating the patients in their own care journey. They are the last mile of and sort of the untapped resource in healthcare, which is getting patients to take care of themselves. And the question is, how do we activate them in that process? I'll give you an example of something actually we just launched, which is it's an Alexa application that extends what we've already had in voice into the home. So the example is you get discharged from the hospital as a patient, you go home, and now Alexa is interacting with you on a daily basis, and it's checking on, hey, how are you doing? It's guiding you to recovery, and it's also alerting, and it's also collecting information, based on what you say, and alerting your provider if you're not doing well. So we're using technology, as your sort of companion along your recovery journey.
Yeah, which kind of raises, I think a few areas to be able to explore. And one of them that, kind of comes foremost to mind is, if you're thinking, as you said about, with your example of, an Alexa skill that allows you to, have interaction and gather some data, it would seem to inform, a different level of trust or a different level of the relationship between a patient and their care team.
Yeah, it does. I think it's certainly there's a bit of trust and familiarity with the technology, right? So that, and that's always the case. But then there's also, now that technology is guiding the patients, the trust in the technology has to be equal to the trust that patients place in their doctors, right? Because the technology is asking them how they're doing and guiding them as to what they should do, et cetera. And this is where we spend a lot of time actually in building the evidence-driven guidelines based on the best evidence of the moment, continuously updating it, and ensuring that what clinicians sort of use for decision support and what we tell patients using digital technology on what to do is all aligned and harmonized. So whatever your doctor is telling you is the same thing as whatever technology is telling you.
So kind of, would you be able to maybe kind of provide a little bit more illumination in terms of, beyond kind of having that same evidence basis for the technology, are there particular strategies or approaches that you see where you can increase that comfort level? Because it almost feels like as time keeps going on, there can be a little bit of a backlash against technology and concerns that it's gathering information and using it in unexpected ways.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I would say we have a couple of pillars that drive how we do this, and ultimately you need to get to the point of trust because you need to get the patient to do the right thing for themselves. The first one is what I mentioned sort of a second ago, which is spending a lot of time making sure that the information is harmonized and consistent between what clinicians see, read, and tell patients, and between what digital technology tells patients and the way it interacts with patients. So that's number one. And you can imagine why, because if they hear something different when they read a document or watch a video or get an Alexa interaction, then what the doctor said, you start breaking that trust, right? It's conflicting information. So that's number one. The second area that, and I give you our experience, and we've been doing this patient engagement part for quite some time, for more than a decade now, is it's in the design of the interactions. How do we design interactions that are not too intrusive, that are not too, the tone of the interactions, the cadence at which we interact with the patients, it goes from the imagery to the tone of the conversation with sort of a voice conversation, if you will, an IVR. It goes, all the way to the types of guidance that we provide through technology, always making sure that the clinician is in charge and making sure the patient understands that the clinical team is in charge. And then this is technology that is there to support them, guide them, but not to replace the clinicians. So again, it's in the harmonization of content where we spend a lot of time, but also in the design of these interactions, because you could easily get it wrong. And if you get it wrong, you're not going to get the patients to trust you.
No, you're kind of framing it as the harmonization between the technology and as a way of facilitating and really promoting the role of the clinician, I think is a great way to describe it. Because as you said, if there is any level of disconnect there, then you're going to breach that trust and potentially harm not only the perceptions around the use of the technology, but also that interaction between the clinician and the patient generally.
Exactly.
So, and for those of you just joining, I'm talking with Jean-Claude Saghbini from Wolters Kluwer Health, and we've been talking about the advancement in the use of technology and ensuring that you have trust in it. And kind of, Jean-Claude, I'd like to transition a little bit because, as I said, when you were talking about that development and increased utilization of, or maybe foremost utilization of technology, the other piece that came to mind as you were talking about is, as you said, it's generating and collecting a lot more data. So what are some of the strategies for ensuring that data is analyzed and interpreted and not just thrown at the clinical team so they feel like they're overwhelmed or flooded with these new sources?
Yeah, it's, we use data that can be given primarily to clinicians. Take that as an example. There's data that can be, or information that's given to clinicians through data science approaches, if you will. So derived data that comes from alerting systems that use AI and so on. But for whatever data we give, we have a series of imperatives for, I call them imperatives for success. I can list them out for you. The first one is accuracy of the data, right? It has to be accurate for somebody to be able to trust it the first time they use it, and then start building a track record of trust between the data and the consumer of the data. The second one is on the volume of data that we give. So there's, as sure you're aware, probably everybody here listening is aware that, we have a problem of alert fatigue with our clinicians, with our doctors. And we want to make sure that we're not flooding people with data. We're providing it at the right time and just the right amount of information to allow them to make a decision, but not flood them with information. And what we see the reaction to that is to turn off all data input, right, and all alerts because people can't deal with it. Another one of the imperatives that we have is explainability. So if I'm saying something or I'm making a recommendation, providing insights as to why that data says what it says. What's the logic behind it? This is especially true if it's, when we start looking at AI and we talk about explainability of AI. So not only here's the alert or here's the risk, but what are the key contributors to that risk? And then finally, it goes a bit without saying that it has to be action oriented. So if I get the data and I don't know what to do about it, then it's almost not useful at that point in time. So it has to be embedded in the workflow and certainly action oriented that somebody could do something about it.
Yeah, so you're just talking about AI and the ability to have it be explainable. So what, kind of how is that actually occurring in practice? Because I feel like AI is certainly, it seems to be one of those technologies where there are a million and one headlines about it with all these kind of futuristic promises or hype around what it does, which overshadows how it's being applied in the real world and creating what are at least from my impression probably unreasonable expectations. So how is it actually helping, and how is it actually being implemented right now?
Yeah, great question. And we've had some mega headlines of moonshots, right, that have sort of detracted from the fact that we've also had extreme successes and continue to have extreme successes as an industry and a healthcare ecosystem with AI. What I would say is, if you think about AI capabilities as being a spectrum map, where on one side you have automation, process automation, then you go through a bit sort of what we call augmented intelligence. Then you get to the other extreme, autonomous intelligence and cognitive intelligence, where sort of machines are doing their own thing. I believe that the sweet spot for AI in healthcare is in the augmented intelligence space. So effectively leaving the clinician in charge while allowing the AI capabilities to inform the clinician into what to do, but leaving whoever needs to make the decisions in charge. So that's a premise that sort of I take sort of extremely seriously in what we build. The other thing that we talk about a lot is successes come from iterative incremental developments. So this is about building capabilities, deploying them in real life, understanding efficacy, collecting data, making them better, and keep iterating. It's no different than what we've done in the software development domain for years. It's about iterative. Our phones got better over time. They didn't start being what they are today. Everything we had got better over time. And the idea is to get it out there and then start iterating and learning. So that's that. So that's certainly an approach that we're taking that we're finding extremely helpful. And it's juxtaposed against the moonshot, sort of many years, and then you show up and something works. I don't think that would be that's a winning strategy.
Yeah, no, and I think you're definitely right. It's, the moonshot is what grabs attention, but then it also creates, I think as you're implying, unrealistic viewpoints as to what artificial intelligence can actually bring to the table. And I liked your description of, it being as an augmented intelligence, as the kind of the sweet spot for it. So are there particular areas within the healthcare industry where it is showing, particular benefit and particular enhancement to operations?
Yeah, there are many. There's one that's closer. That's and we sort of we do AI across the board in sort of different areas. An interesting one that we find a lot of promise in is the area of clinical surveillance. So this is where, we use AI to collect data from whatever sources in real time. The primary source being the EHR. So collect data, process that data, and process the complexity of that data in a way that humans can't do it, right? So again, humans are in charge, but humans cannot read all that data and process it. So process massive amounts of data and then provide predictions or early alerts on some key medical conditions or deteriorations of a patient's condition. So we've deployed solutions around sepsis. In that domain, we've deployed solutions for C. difficile, looking at respiratory failure and many other areas. But to me, these are sort of poster child successes of AI, right? Is processing tons of data. The data is there. Humans cannot process it, but you process that information and then you provide effectively an early warning system to the clinicians on what's happening to the patients that they're taking care of.
Yeah, and that kind of wraps around to what you were saying earlier, which is, as you said, if the AI systems can help crunch through all the information and then help present it to the clinician to make that professional determination based on their knowledge and experience, now all of a sudden you have a tool that is helping to make the clinician's life easier and helping to drive better overall care.
Exactly. And then one more thing is around adoption, right? So it's one thing to build these tools. How do you get clinicians to adopt them? And I'll put it out there. I think the trick, at least for us, is and this is what's attracted me to come to Wolters Kluwer, is the ability as a technologist to work hand in hand with clinicians. So this is not about AI where a whole bunch of data scientists go in a room, get a whole bunch of data and just work through it and come out and say, hey, eureka, we found the solution. This is these are teams that are comprised with clinicians, doctors, informaticists, data scientists, software developers, customers that are working together to not only build the technology, but upfront think about the adoptability of that technology, the acceptability of it, the levels at which it should alert or not alert, or the types of alerts it should do, all the way to the visual aspect. Is this a green, yellow, red? Is this a number? Is this text kind of alert that I should be providing? So, that is one thing I would say that has been crucial to success, is that this is technology plus clinicians plus all the other constituents I just mentioned.
Yeah, no, having adoptability, kind of foremost in mind, either, I think, as you said, not everyone's necessarily thinking about it, or they're not being honest about thinking about it. Because you're definitely right. If you could create the best tool in the world from a theoretical standpoint, but if it doesn't work in a way that helps a clinician or helps someone in real world practice, then who's going to want to use it? You need to have something that isn't making lives worse, but really helping to reduce burden. And it kind of gets repeated often, but just kind of fits seamlessly into the background without having to add more time and attention to what's already an overcrowded day for a clinician.
Exactly.
So kind of, as we're already, very close to the end of our time, kind of one last piece I'd like to be able to touch on is access to data. Because we've been talking about, creation and use of a lot of information, but, kind of where does the access piece fall into all those considerations?
We've made progress, right? We're not where we were. We're not where we should be. So we're on that journey. I'm optimistic. I'm a glass half full kind of person. So I'm optimistic. We're making progress, continue to making progress. Regulations are helping. So it's heading us in the right direction. We're starting now to turn a bit our attention on not only the volume of data, but the cleanliness of that data. So as you get more and more data, is it normalized? Is it standardized? Can I compute on it? And these are the next generation of challenges that we are facing, and leveraging a whole bunch of tools and methodologies. And we have some assets around that we are starting to focus on A, the acquisition, but B is, can I process it, clean it, and put it in a state that's computable? And to answer your question, I'm optimistic. We're on again, like I said, we're on that journey. We will get there. COVID-19, with everything bad that it did, it helped in showing what can be done when there is freer data movement and data access. And, the charts and reports and understanding of what's happening around the entire country with COVID-19 wouldn't have been imaginable years ago or a year ago, that we could be at this point of having that exact level of accuracy in tracking a pandemic.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, and it's kind of brings it back around to almost where we started, which is that COVID and the resulting pandemic and drive for adoption innovation has really had so many different changes and impacts on the industry. And I think, as you're saying, hopefully a lot of positive silver linings to what had been a really bad situation. But believe it or not, we are already out of time. I want to thank my guest, Jean-Claude Saghbini, for a great conversation today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep the dialogue going and connect with me at #HCDEJURE. I'm Matt Fisher. Until next time.